Welcome back, Everyday Warrior Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Sorelli. We've got a good one today. But again, I always say that. But this is a great life story. I'd like to welcome my comrade, Jack Barsky, on the show to give you a synopsis, and we're going to dig in here. In fact, this may be a two-parter for the length we go. I spoke to Jack on the phone for about 30 minutes, which was meant to be a 5-minute conversation. So we've got a lot to discuss. But Jack is a former KGB. You prefer the term secret agent over spy?
Yes, but illegal, really. I wasn't illegal, which is, the difference between, there's three types of agents. They're the ones with official cover, that are mostly diplomats.
Yes, I understand that.
Then there are the knock, no official cover.
Yes.
They operate under their own name, but, they're businessmen or entertainers or what have you. I came here to impersonate an American, so illegal, deep undercover, which is a rarity because that's one heck of a task. I came to the U.S. The moment I set foot onto U.S. territory, I pretended to have been born here. That requires a bit of guts, and it requires a talent to speak the language with just a tad of an accent that's explainable. When I listen to myself, I still hear it. A lot of people don't.
But you were trained to hear it and adapt.
No, this is all. You see, the KGB hired talent, and I know this now because I discovered a couple of interviews that were given by the heads of the Directorate S illegals, and they came up with a set of character traits and capabilities that they were looking for. They didn't train me psychologically. Yes, I had very, very good teachers for American English. However, they also relied on me being extremely ambitious, and I, for 1 year, every night I did phonetics exercises like a maniac. Okay, so from that angle, they did a good job finding people like me. It is what it is.
The KGB and the CIA. One, it's funny you talk about attributes. I wrote a book called The Talent War. How special operations, great organizations win on talent, and it's all about hiring, not for experience, hiring for attributes. Based off the special operation model.
Yeah.
We're looking for specific things, not the guy who can run the fastest, not the guy who's the strongest, not the guy who's the best swimmer. Like, that's great. You're an athlete, but can you be an athlete and a warrior that has these certain attributes?
You're 100% right. I have a good friend who is legend among folks who know a little bit about the CIA, James Lawler. When we first met, we were like fundamentally identical in the way we exchanged how we were raised and what made us successful in the field that we operated in, and even some minor details like techniques that we use. There seems to be an international standard.
Have you ever been through the CIA museum at the CIA Center?
No, I don't even know where it is.
It's in the CIA. We used to go down there when I was with a certain command quite a bit, but they've got all the history of the Cold War to include, KGB history. And it is interesting to just see the innovation on both sides with regards to technology, tactics, techniques, procedures. It's something to see, and I think you would get a kick out of it. But I do want to dive into your life story, and I know we're going to get to contemporary issues and a little bit of history. But so you were born in East Germany.
That's correct.
Brothers, sisters. What did your father and mother do?
My parents were both teachers, which actually, in hindsight, I was pretty lucky because teachers were really well treated in East Germany. There was the new generation of teachers that replaced all the Nazis, and they were well paid, and there was never real poverty in my house. I mean, we didn't have good food and good clothes, but, I don't remember ever having been hungry. I don't remember ever having been cold to a point where I couldn't handle it. So that was good. There's one brother, 3 years younger than me, and it sounds cruel, but it appears that God put all the energy into making me, and there was nothing left for him because he was a failure. Too bad. And we never had a relationship, you know.
Yeah. So you demonstrated a academic acumen. You did very well in school, and now it makes sense that your parents were teachers. You ended up attending a prestigious university for chemistry.
Right.
And were on, I think you graduated a sort of a prized scholar.
I aced the damn program, and it's the equivalent of a master's degree. And based on in my junior year, I received a national scholarship that was limited to 100, mind you, 100 concurrent holders. So I was elite. Now, that also had something to do that I was very active in the communist youth movement. I also played basketball on the college team.
How tall are you? I was going to say that.
I'm about 6'3".
6'3".
Nowadays, I would be a point guard, and I have no skills to do that.
Yeah. Tall. You know, it's funny. Tall, dark, and handsome. It all fits a profile. But eventually, you end up on the KGB's sort of, let's say, high recruit list, and it was a Stasi member that first approached you. Correct?
Well, no, that's an urban legend, which I think when I was first interviewed, I mentioned that I thought he was Stasi. But as time went on, and I may have even believed it was Stasi. The guy was a German. But the reason that I now think he was KGB, because the Stasi and the KGB did not share information like that. Like, for instance, when I was KGB, I was hands off for the Stasi. All records about me in the East German files were deleted. I became a state secret of the Soviet Union. So it was a German who they had volunteers. They worked with volunteers in every country, friendly country. So it was a German, and it was the stupidest volunteer / KGB agent that I've ever met in my life. I mean, it was.
So he's basically HR. He's the
HR.
Gotcha.
Bingo.
But I mean, so how old were you when they approached you?
I was 24.
So you got a young 24-year-old who's adventurous, who's active, and the lure of becoming a KGB agent must have drawn you in.
Now, let me just give you a slightly different perspective. They approached me based on what they saw in the records. They may have interviewed a couple of people, like the party secretary or whatever of the section chemistry. And then once I was introduced, the German introduced me to a Russian, and he said, "Oh, by the way, we're working with our Soviet comrades." And then the German disappeared, and I now was quote unquote friends. I knew he didn't say KGB. I knew, and that was very flattering because I knew the KGB at the time was the most powerful organization on the planet.
Yes,
and they wanted me. So I said, well, let's see what happens. You know, I was very playful. I at that point, I didn't seriously consider to one day do what I did. But, you know, curiosity and flattery and blah, blah, blah. It took Herman 18 months. He studied me. We talked about everything. He became my ersatz dad. So I shared everything with him. One of the things I shared with him that probably impressed him very much, that one summer a friend of mine and I went hitchhiking all the way from East Germany down to Bulgaria. That was very rare. There was an adventure. You never knew where you would sleep. It was just like most people would say, "No, we can't do that. We get on a train, right?" I came back and told them, I checked all the boxes with regard to qualification to be an undercover illegal. The plan initially was for them to send me to West Germany. Now, here's another piece of logic. The Stasi had several hundred agents in West Germany. Some of them were at high levels in the government. So why did the KGB need another one? Because they didn't really trust each other. Okay, there's a lot of things that came to me much later when I had a chance to think about this, right? Yeah. So, and it took them 18 months to eventually make me the offer, and that was unexpected. I had a trip to Berlin to do a little more training, and the last day of that training, there was some training, but I didn't know the real reason I was there. So I was led into the headquarters of the Soviet Army in East Germany, which also was the headquarters of the KGB, and my liaison there and I went to an office, and there was a little man sitting behind the desk, a little guy, and then he opened his mouth, and he wasn't little anymore. There was a phenomenal amount of psychological energy coming at me. And, he spoke only Russian, and I understood enough Russian to understand that what he was talking about was mostly propaganda. That I didn't need that. Why we're doing this, and the evil capitalists and the Americans and so forth. Again, the thought that they had was to send me to West Germany, and then out of the blue he said, "So are you in or not?" I had never really I had played with the idea, because I really liked the city where I studied and lived. I liked my basketball team. I was already somebody. I was going to be a tenured professor, which, based on, my parents being teachers, that would have been a dream come true. Tenured professors even nowadays in Europe are gods. It's not like here, everybody's a professor. No. You become a member of the ruling class, and, I was a party member, and everything was, and all of a sudden this offer was made, and I wasn't prepared to give an answer, and I stalled. He said, "I'm not really prepared. I don't know if I qualify." And he said, the fellow said, "We know that you're qualifying, and we will train you, but we only work with people who can make an important decision like this. You got until noon tomorrow." And now the question typically that comes that people ask, so if I had said no, would it have been a problem? I don't think so, because you don't pressure somebody into a job like that. It had to be a volunteer. And so I didn't sleep all night. I'm like, this is what I want to do. Decision time, real important. Is a life-changing decision. Analysis didn't do it. It's the gut that made the decision. And I know that now that I had a very, very thorough genetic analysis done by a friend of mine, and very, very high risk tolerance. Surprise, surprise, we got that in common. And so when it comes to these types of decisions, you and I tend to go where the danger is, right? And the adventure and the interesting, because if you don't take risk, life is boring, right? So fundamentally, my gut said yes, and so that's how I became not an employee of the KGB. I became a contractor, because they did not. You had to in order to be an employee, you had to be a Soviet citizen. Mm-hmm. Okay, mm-hmm. But it doesn't matter, And I also became a state secret at that point. Yes. And I was, because of what they wanted me to do, there were maybe 2 or 3 people in the KGB itself that knew me, who I really was.
Before we move on to the training, let me ask you this. We're all fed an ideology from birth. Americans say, "Oh, we're not fed an ideology." No, we are. And I like that ideology. I agree with it. Much like a Islamic extremist is fed, or Russians are fed an ideology. Did you fundamentally hate America?
Yes,
Why?
because we were taught that America is the source of all evil. And you see, this lie was relatively easy to make credible. And I say this, that, in order to sell a big lie, if it has a kernel of truth, it is a whole lot easier to make credible. And the kernel of truth was that in West Germany there were some Nazis in the government, ex-Nazis. And one chancellor by the name of Kurt Georg Kiesinger had been a member of the Nazi Party. The head of the Bundesnachrichtendienst was once in charge of intelligence for Hitler on the Eastern Front. And that was well known. So, and the Americans, the U.S. government, supported NATO and supported the West German government, which was infiltrated by Nazis. And it is a very, very interesting parallel. Putin is calling Ukraine fascist. Well, there are Nazis in Ukraine for sure, and they're allowed to operate freely. So I don't want to. I just got to mention this right here at this point. 10 years ago, Stepan Bandera would have celebrated his 100th birthday, and the Ukrainian government issued commemorative stamps. Okay, case closed. It's so easy to sell that lie. Okay, yeah. Believed it hook, line, and sinker. And on top of it, it was deepened by the idiotic extended Vietnam War that the United States was involved in.
And we will get to that, because I know you have a very interesting perspective on that. So you say yes to the KGB. You start training, and training, if I read it correctly, was about 2 years in length.
2 years did base training. I was supposed to be 2 years in Berlin and then off to West Germany.
But you did both training in Germany and then eventually went to Moscow.
Well, yeah, but that came about because, again, like a maniac, most of the training was my own initiative, other than tradecraft. Okay, tradecraft. I had one-on-one sessions with the specialists, but everything else, including acquiring another language with reasonable fluency, that was up to me. And they allowed me to pick the language, so I picked English because I had no problem in school with English. I aced it. It was like it came very natural. And one day I had a visitor from Moscow, and he asked me, "So how's your English?" And I pulled out a novel written in English, and I showed it to him. I said, "I can read this, no problem." Huh? So he had a brainstorm, and he said, "Well, let's see how good your spoken English is." And they gave me a tape recorder and told me, just say something, like for a half hour. The tape recorder was sent to Moscow. Within a week, I was on a plane to Moscow. So that was not planned. I didn't know it, and nobody else knew it, that I had a talent to speak English even before practicing, with not that typical Arnold Schwarzenegger accent. I am the party pooper. So I wound up in Moscow, and I had a conversation with two ladies. One was a professor at Moscow University teaching English. Of course, she was KGB, but that was her official job. And the other one was a born American. And after this half-hour talk, they withdrew and discussed things back and forth, and the American said, thumbs up, typical American optimism, and the Russian said, nah, he can't do it. And wishful thinking prevailed. So the decision maker said, okay, you're going to come here, and you're going to study English like a maniac, and you get more training in tradecraft. So I spent 2 full years all by myself in isolation in Russia. No social interaction. That was also good preparation for what was to come.
Because they are keeping you as as much of a secret as they can.
Oh, you bet. And I at one point they allowed me to reach out. They pointed out a person who studied English at Moscow University, a young man, and sat in a library, and I befriended him so I could, socially converse in English for a little bit. But I told him I forgot what my cover was, but clearly I didn't indicate that I wasn't up to something super secret.
2 years of training.
Yeah.
Intensive?
Yeah, because of me. Again, that's why they hired somebody.
Just self-drive.
Like me. Oh, absolutely. That's how I aced high school, college, and again, college in the U.S.
Did you realize you were on their radar to be, let's say, planted into the U.S.?
Yes.
Or at what point did you?
No, yes. When that became clear, the
Day
reason
one.
that, yeah. When I was moved to Moscow, the direction changed completely. And the details weren't really brought to me until the time came to get ready to come here. And the whole idea of getting a birth certificate of an individual who had passed away at a young age.
Jack Philip Barsky.
Barsky, yeah, born in
Jewish, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
But the saving grace was that mother's maiden name was Schwartz. It was another one of those things that just wasn't planned, but that way I was able to explain that residual German accent that I have because I grew up bilingual. And in New York, nobody questions that. There are Latinos that are born in New York City that have a heavier accent than I do, much heavier. So anyway.
And you were briefed when you were going to come through Canada to the U.S., is that
No,
correct?
I didn't come through Canada. I had a practice trip. I spent 3 months in Canada, mostly Montreal, to get a feel for what it would be like in the United States. We considered Canada like a younger brother of the United States, very similar. But I came to the U.S. My point of entry was O'Hare Airport in Chicago. So that was the most stressful whatever minutes that I spent in line for passport control, and then I'm missing that word when they check your stuff. What's that?
Basically today's TSA. But
No. It's
Customs.
Customs.
Yes.
See what happens to me.
Yeah.
And it happens all the time. Once in a while, the German word pops into my head, and my German and my English are not well connected. I can't translate because I isolated them. They're in different parts of the brain, and the connections are like tenuous. So
is that part of training?
No. Well, the thing is, as soon as I knew enough English to study more English based on English, I didn't go German English all the time. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
you went all in, is what we say.
Exactly, and
You had to become your illegal cover.
Yeah, and in the end, I was so successful that I speak broken German now.
What passport did you come through on?
I came to the U.S. with a forged Canadian passport.
Forged Canadian.
The only name I remember, I traveled with probably 2 dozen false passports in the 10 years. The only name I remember is that one because it was such a key moment in my life. It's William Dyson. William Dyson, who was a resident of Toronto. And man, the reason I was so scared was I spent time in Canada, and I know that Canadians don't speak like Americans. So
Take off, eh?
yeah, and I was concerned that I might be interviewed, and I kept my answers really short, and I made it through.
You're in, and you were briefed specifically to infiltrate the higher echelons of the private sector as well as government. And I'm sorry, the primary former Russian who was a intelligence advisor to the president.
Okay. This this requires some explanation. You can edit this out, right?
It's okay. We keep it natural here.
Okay. Requires some explanation. There's one thing that I was told, and there's one thing that I found that I was never told. So I'm going to tell you what I found out, what I was never told. The most important value of my being undercover in the United States was my being undercover in the United States. Again, it was made explicit by the interviews that I mentioned before, and so it sort of makes a lot of sense in hindsight. The height of the Cold War, mid '80s to late '80s.
Yes. And
there were a couple of moles in the U.S. government, Aldrich Ames and Robert Hansen, and they had direct contact with U.S. diplomats, KGB agents, and there was this war going on between the CIA and the KGB. When you found a diplomat doing things that they weren't supposed to do, they were extradited, and then there was retaliation. And at one point, they would extradite 3 of them, and there was retaliation. And Andropov, who was at the time, I don't know if he was already president, but I think he was. But he was ex-head of the KGB. He was afraid that diplomatic relations would be broken completely. At which point, there was nobody to interact with these 2 super damaging spies, the Ames and Hansen. They were the most successful spies in the KGB's history, with one exception: the ones that stole the atomic secret. Okay, but so that and I also have confirmation of this theory that I'm shared with you just now. I met a colleague of mine, is a German who was an illegal in the United States. He came to the U.S. Like 3 or 4 years after me with his wife, like the real Americans, and he had no task. He was just told, just live there.
Sleeper.
Yeah, total sleeper. I was a sleeper, and then some, because they told me make contacts. The focus was, in my case, was on foreign policy. Make contacts with foreign policy decision makers or influencers. And the name Brzezinski was mentioned once, and I think I mentioned that in the 60 Minutes interview, and that became an urban legend. I didn't really have a direct task. It was like the same concept of build it and they will come. Just like try whatever you can and see what you can do, okay? And it was every time I went back, every 2 years, the one thing that they criticized me for was, you don't have not enough good contacts. I said, how am I going to have good contacts? I'm a bike messenger, and now I'm a student. I don't have the standing in society to befriend people that you're interested in. And they understood that. And they still didn't tell me why it was so important for me to be there. Never once. It's like really weird.
It's, as we would say, they wanted you prepared for follow-on tasking.
But I didn't even get training what to do in case you may have to sabotage someplace. No weapons training. No, not even a talk about munitions and stuff like that. Nothing.
But smart people figured it out.
But this was, I think, where the KGB was very good at keeping secrets, which, by the way, American intelligence is not. But this was, they overdid it, okay? They also didn't, they gave me instructions that I had to follow and didn't give me a foundation why I had to follow these rules. So when I had to make a decision on my own because I was in a situation for which I wasn't prepared, I didn't have enough of a foundation to make the right decisions. That's one time that is when I was highly criticized. I was back on my way to Moscow through Rome, and there was a strike at the airport, and somehow Aeroflot couldn't fly, and I was told, you take Aeroflot into Moscow, no other airlines. And it was a week already, and I liked walking around in Rome, but I wanted to go back home, see my family in Germany. I had limited amount of time, so I booked on Alitalia. And the moment I appear in Moscow and my liaison picked me up, he said, "You shouldn't have done that." I said, "Why?" "Well, this passport, they're very, very hard to make. It's now not valid because there is now a record in NATO that this person flew into Moscow." I said, "Well, if you had told me that before, I would have made the right decision. It didn't occur to me."
So you end up going back to school. I'm assuming that's in because you ended up in IT software development.
Yeah.
What was the major?
The major was I had a BBA in business administration, and the major was computer systems. And that was based on my overriding the decision made in Moscow. They wanted me to study economics, to go to Wall Street and become rich. But I fell in love with the first time I had a task to write a program in Fortran, and the scientist in me started playing around with it and said, "Well, this is really great." So I switched to major, and I told them, and they were okay with this.
How were you communicating? Dead drops?
No,
shortwave radio?
Okay, so the interaction, so to speak, which obviously was asynchronous. I never met an agent on the territory of the United States that was a no-no. So what the Americans, they have a handler that they meet on a regular basis. That was forbidden by Andropov himself. So no verbal communication. I received weekly shortwave transmissions, double encrypted. And I sent what I had to communicate via secret writing, airmail letters to third countries. Very, very awkward. That was the most awkward part of my existence as an agent because, first of all, I complained about this because it was for 10 years at 9:45 in the evening. My radio signals started going, so I was never available for, hanging out, social events, dates, Thursdays, and I said, this is not good. I'm establishing a pattern. There's nothing we can do about it, which leads me to the conclusion that they rented time in Havana. Right? They had no control over it. So and occasionally those radiograms were pretty long, and for the decryption to finally come up with words could have taken me into the wee hours of the next morning. Awkward. And the other way around, secret writing. Well, first of all, I was limited to two pieces of paper, stationary. So you start writing an open text, pretending you know the person you're writing to. I'm so sorry to hear that you broke your nose or whatever, and blah blah blah, and then you write a bunch of nonsense, and then you use a contact paper that was actually, I had a writing pad that I took with me from Moscow that was acquired at Woolworths. Doesn't exist anymore. The Walmart. Walmart is what Woolworths was, and the first pages of that pad were impregnated with just a trace of a chemical. So if you didn't know what you're looking for, you wouldn't find it. Right? So I used that as contact paper, and then I, in block letters, I wrote the message. And I also had to encrypt any information about other people, phone numbers, names, addresses, and that took at least 2 hours. And then the rule was I had to go on a counter surveillance route for about 3 hours before mailing. That put this thing in the envelope into a mailbox, because if somebody follows me and they see that, they know how to pull the most recent letter out of there. So, and typically that took care of my Saturday. But, during the week, I either was a student or I had a job. And so again, Saturdays I wasn't available. It was awkward. It was really awkward. Eventually, I started cutting corners, particularly with counter surveillance. I became pretty cocky, but that's par for the course. I think
that's human nature.
Yeah.
So I did go through what we call advanced force operations, AFO, which is the low vis side, as we call it, tradecraft, dead drops, counter surveillance routes, and I did extremely well in the course.
Yeah.
More writing than I enjoyed.
Hey, we have that in common. As far as tradecraft, the folks that trained me said, "You're one of the best ever."
I found it so boring, and whenever I wouldn't say the opportunity, the tasking came to do that, I said, "No, I'm good. I'll stick with the combat operations," which that's where I wanted to be. I enjoyed, but it takes again, it goes back to those attributes. It takes a very specific individual to do those type of operations.
Yeah.
And it just, let's see, when I went through that course, I had to be 29, 28. It didn't, I was just bored. I was bored.
Yeah.
And there is a boredom to that life. There's also the risk of, and you knew it. What people don't understand is when you take a tasking like that, and we were told in certain operations, if you're caught, you will spend the rest of your life in an American jail or this country's jail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is where one thing that we don't have in common. I'm a person of action, but I'm also very, very disciplined. I didn't necessarily enjoy what I was doing,
consistent,
but I knew it was necessary. Yeah. And that discipline is part of genetics, German discipline, and it was hammered into me by my mother. It was reinforced in a big way. So, and it helps me even today. I started lifting weights again. I hate lifting weights, but I do it now on a regular basis because it's got to be done.
It does. Muscle-based health. It's, I know technically muscle is not an organ, but it is, when you think about it, the largest organ.
No, with the heart.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, this, and people will tell you who, I have a lot of friends, retired FBI, CIA, NSA. Life of an agent is probably 90% waiting and 10% action.
And that, again, takes a specific type of individual. So I've got to ask you this. One, you fell in love with a woman, had 2 children. Your daughter changed your perspective on everything from what I read and watched. When did you start to fall in love with America?
It was gradual, and it started when I had my first job as a professional, so after college. Because first of all, I liked the work, I liked the people, I was treated well, and it felt almost as an insurance company, very paternalistic in those days. Mm-hmm. It felt almost like I'm back home. Okay, and at one point, and I remember, I don't know exactly where I was and when that was, but I remember I had the thought, because I knew I eventually would be withdrawn. there's a shelf life to a person like me. If we are too good at the task, we become what we're supposed to become, and that's dangerous. Okay, so I knew they were talking about 10 to 12 years, and I was thinking, man, I'm gonna miss this here. So it was just the microenvironment that I was in, not American as a country. That took more time. That took more studying of American history. It took more just like living in the U.S. and paying attention to what's going on. And what really made me emotional in American was 9/11. I still remember, the day I was commuting from New Jersey, within New Jersey, and I drove by an American flag, and all of a sudden I had this feeling here, like, yeah, that's my country. But it was. I'm sorry. This was a very, very gradual process, and not deliberate. I didn't really want to. It just
you're defeating decade-old preconceived notions.
Yeah.
I mean, you were taught to believe one thing, and I've never been to Russia, and I've always wanted to go to Moscow because all my friends who've gone to Moscow, they're like, it's like Vegas. If you're into the nightlife, they enjoyed everything about it. But the one common thing I've always seen is like Americans are pretty welcoming. Russian culture is just interesting. Like there are a lot of things I respect about the Russian culture, but at face value, they are a cold, stern people.
But that's not true.
Is it? Then break my preconceived.
Russians are very nice. Very sweet. They will welcome you with open arms, and there's the upper crust of Russian society are highly educated. What the problem is with over since its inception, the Russian government has always been a dictatorship of some kind. The Tsars and then Lenin and Stalin and now Putin. I love the Russian people. I love the Russian culture. I spent 2 years in Moscow, so I eventually, because I had no social interaction, I watched television. And I even got to a point where I watched movies. And the Russian music is phenomenal, classical and also folklore. Mm-hmm. As opposed to, I don't like German folk music. That's horrible. So I can't say anything bad about Russians. But when you're talking about brainwashing, there's something in the
state media.
No. Good guess, but I'm going to go a little more into history. Something what I call in the national DNA, and it's the fear of being invaded. And there's historic precedents. Ever since the formation of Russia, they would be invaded from the north, from the Scandinavian countries, for the, what I'm talking about. Another word that I'm missing now, the
West.
The Vikings.
The Vikings. Yes.
From the east, the
Mongols. Yep.
Mongols. From the west, there was Napoleon, and there was Hitler, and from the south, the Turks. And so Putin has a real easy time to convince him that it's happening again. It's sort of like over centuries it built up that we are surrounded by the enemies. And by the way, I know a person who grew up in a really, really, really bad neighborhood in Kingston, Jamaica. And that person knows that the world is her enemy too. And this is very difficult to get out of your system because it's in way back in your brainstem.
Eventually, let me ask you this: where were you when the wall fell?
I lived in Queens, New York, with my then wife. the mother of my daughter, and I watched it with disbelief on television in my living room. I says, "What?" Nobody had a clue. I mean, the CIA didn't know, the KGB wasn't prepared, the Stasi had no clue. The whole world was taken by surprise. So I now have a theory, and I think that's not so far. That may surprise you a little bit. It's not so far-fetched. I'm comparing the U.S. educational system at the level prior to college to the way we were taught in East Germany. Half of our curriculum in my senior year was science and math. We were taught to think. Americans aren't taught to think anymore. But that thinking eventually is what made the East German population said it's enough. So the system sort of laid the groundwork for its own destruction. Kind of, there's so many paradoxes
because critical thinking was so high within the curriculum.
Yes.
That it creates dissidence.
Yes, well, you do science and math. You just learning the periodic table is not enough. You need, there's physics and there's math, and you have to be logical. And the only aspect where ideology just dominated was history and communist ideology, which was taught to us as a science as well, because Marx just discovered the laws that govern the evolution of human society. Well, we believed it hook, line, and sinker. That at that point, my critical thinking stopped, simply because I had no reason to doubt, because I was well treated and I became part of the elite, and that I knew I was going to be one of the real smart ones who tell all the dumb ones how to be happy. And I think we have something like that going on in the United States right now.
Doesn't even scratch the surface.
Except the real smart ones aren't really that smart.
No. Actually, they're pretty dumb. Dumb or brazen. I don't know. Maybe a bit of both.
Bill Maher or Maher, however you pronounce his name. Me too. He calls them all idiots.
And he's probably accurate. When anyone thinks they're above reproach, you've got it coming. I do want to dive into that a little later. At what point did the KGB stop communicating with you? Was it prior to the wall? After the wall?
No, I quit.
Oh,
remember?
Yes.
So I quit. I told them,
this one's good.
They had reason to somehow they had reason to believe that I might be arrested very soon. So they told me to flee, get out of the country, emergency, boom, boom, boom. And
they actually had this is the first contact you ever had with a Russian agent in the U.S. Somebody came up to you at the subway.
Yeah, initially it was a signal. It was a red dot on a steel beam that supports the subway going into Manhattan. And that dot meant, activate emergency procedure. So there was no words. It was just, this is it, get out, go to, make a beeline to Canada. And this is when my daughter came into play, because she was 18 months old, and I had not figured out a way to support this girl, because her mother would not have been able to even make a good childhood for her, much less prepare her for a good life, because she had just 4 years of schooling. Came out of Latin America with 4 years. She wasn't dumb, but she was uneducated. My daughter would have grown up in a real bad neighborhood. So, and I didn't know how to, take care of her from a distance, because clearly I was not going to ask the KGB to help me because I had lied to them. I had not disclosed that I had married this woman. I had not disclosed that I had a child. So, and this is again where the decision ultimately came down to not analysis, because analysis said, you got to go. You got to go. Because if you stay and the FBI captured you, well, you're no good to this girl anyway. I should have rationalized this. I would have, guilt-free, I had to run. But this is where my instinct took over again. I picked the most dangerous path, and I'm not proud of it. It's, again, because it wasn't analysis, it was instinct. This is sort of built into my genetic makeup. It's love combined with risk-taking. So, yeah, I told him my last letter in secret writing, that was after I was approached by an agent who they knew my way to work, and he got a hold of me while I was waiting on a train, a subway train, and he whispered into my ears, "You got to come home or else you're dead." Okay, well, I decided to interpret this as a lack of knowledge of the English language. He should have probably said, or else you're in trouble, or else you're busted, or something like that.
Because I was going to say, did you take that as a threat that the KGB
You
would?
had to take it as a threat,
Yes.
because I knew that if they had interpreted my disobedience as defection, I would possibly be in trouble, yes. And that's when I had a brainstorm, and I don't know. I think nowadays I've come to the conclusion that I'm dominated by my subconscious. There's a lot of good and bad stuff that just pops into my head. I'm not even looking for it, right? And that idea, I wasn't like sitting there and thinking, says, "Oh no, that would work." So I told him I have HIV/AIDS.
And there was a big fear.
Oh, absolutely.
In Russia.
I remember, but the last time I was in Moscow, we were talking about how AIDS, is a bane on capitalist society. It's like the lifestyle, and so it serves them right. And in those days, it was not curable. You would die.
Yes.
And so they had no reason not to believe that, because nothing that they knew about me would have been an explanation for this to be a lie. So they actually went to my German family and told them that I died. And to this day, in the German files that keep records of dead people, Albrecht Dittrich, that's my German name, passed away in 1988. Yeah. So, and it took me about, 3 months of taking precautions. The only precaution I could take to avoid, being damaged, so to speak, physically, was making sure that I wasn't predictably in the same spot at the same time, so he couldn't wait for me. And then I took some other defensive measures to see if the FBI is actually after me, and nothing. There was nothing. And so after the 3 months was up, I pretty much knew I was in the clear, and I told my wife, I said, "You know what? It's time for us to save some money and buy a house." So
moving from Queens to
New
Jersey or Pennsylvania, right?
No, actually, initially it was Orange County, which is on the other side of
Yes.
Westchester County.
Yes.
And we were looking if Orange County was cheap and was nice, and it also was a 2-hour commute. But anyway, and that was the start of my version of the American dream. House in the suburbs, good job, and it continued. I had a nice career. I made more money. I moved, made even more money. I built a had built a McMansion with a pool and a waterfall into the pool, and then came some crisis. I don't want to get too much into this. There was a divorce and a remarriage and another divorce. But if I'm one thing that can describe me, I'm very resilient. I'm almost an extreme stoic. Shit happens, you deal with it.
And you move on.
You move on, yeah.
Yeah.
And
again, an attribute they must have
yeah,
screened you heavily for.
There's always another day, until it's time to leave. But I'm not ready to leave quite now. I still have things to do. I have a 13-year-old daughter who I love as dearly as I love the one that is now an adult. And I think, I actually know I've been told enough by others who I value much that I have a message that should be heard. You
do. And it's amazing the power of love and how it overrides all logic whatsoever.
Yeah, and let me tell you that I gave a talk at Microsoft. It was one of my first talks, and I hadn't really processed all my past really thoroughly, so there was always new ideas that popped into my head, and it still happens. But at the end of the talk, this beautiful young lady raised her hand and asked me a question. She says, so what is, of all the stuff that you went through, what's the most important lesson you have taken away? And that was a new question. I was thinking for a little bit, and I said, oh, love conquers all. As phony as it might sound, but it's true. And I heard a story of that is very similar to mine, where a Mossad agent went illegal in an Arabic country and had a family there. And when they called him back, he says, "Can I bring my family?" And they said no. So he stayed. Now, I can't condemn the man, because love is just such a strong force, and unfortunately, people just society is so shallow these days that they just limit love to the male-female type love, sexual interaction. Then we go and love somebody else. That's not what it's all about,
That's lust.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So eventually, and you're going to have to give me which year or years, a Russian agent defects to the U.S.
Yeah.
Brings a significant amount of, well, he'd written it all in a notebook from what I understand, but he had access to a lot of intelligence. And in those notebooks,
yeah,
they identify a sleeper agent of sorts.
All right. If I'm allowed to correct you a little
yeah,
bit.
Please.
So this fellow, his name was Vasily Mitrokhin. Mitrokhin was an archivist for the Directorate S, and so he took care of all the files, and he started reading stuff, and that made him really hate the government, the regime that he was working for. Mm. And he decided to see if he could do some damage. So he copied things and wrote them on small pieces of paper. I know all of this because FBI told me afterwards, right? And smuggled them out in his underwear and in his socks. And then transcribed the stuff with a typewriter and buried the results in his dacha. Eventually, that was about 3 suitcases full of intelligence. The biggest intelligence success was the theft of the atomic secret.
Yes.
This one was the second biggest intelligence.
No kidding.
Oh, absolutely, because there was information about still existing Russian agents, A lot of agents got busted. Okay, they weren't like me. They were Russians, and so they when the Soviet Union fell apart, they just kept on going because they had loyalty to the Russian nation. So it was in 1992. The Soviet Union had already ceased to exist. He made his way to, I think, Estonia and knocked on the doors of the British embassy and told them what he had. He tried the U.S. embassy in Moscow on a weekend, and the person in charge said, "We're not interested." That's a career limiting move. He was a junior officer. Bad decision. Anyway, the Brits said, "Look, come on in, let's have a cup of tea." And so they managed to go into Russia and exfiltrate the documents and exfiltrate Vasily. And it took some time for MI6 to share the information with U.S. intelligence. At the time, it was 9 years after I resigned, so in 1997, when I was finally approached by the FBI. At that time, there was already a book. I actually had plans to bring that book. It's called "The Sword and the Shield," which is the authoritative source for KGB operations abroad during the Cold War. And I was originally named in there as one of the agents, and that because I was still an active case, it was redacted out, and I'm still not in it. It's okay.
But they surveilled you for close to 12 months, correct?
Close to 2 years.
2 years.
Okay, again, there was Hansen and Ames were still active, or they had just been caught. I think they had just been caught, and they had just been caught, and they were worried there might be another one, and they didn't know whether I was still active or not. And so, for them to figure this out, they couldn't get too close to me, because if I'm still active, they knew I was highly trained. I had survived that many years, so they watched me from a distance until they got to a point where they say, "No, this guy is not spying anymore," and that's when they decided to say hello to me.
It is it true the first words out of your mouth were, "Why did it take you so long?"
Second sentence. The first one was, "Am I under arrest?"
Ah.
And then, "What took you so long?" Instinct. I instinctively I knew that I had to find a way to make them like me, because you treat people you like differently from people you don't like, and so and that's based on feedback from the lead agent, who is still a friend of mine,
Joe Riley.
He said, "Yeah, that was a good moment," and then when we sat down in a motel and started the interview, it wasn't an interrogation; it was an interview. I before even being asked the first question, I volunteered that, listen, I said, I know that for my family and myself to get out of this situation with the least amount of damage, I have to completely cooperate, and I have every intention to do so. That put the discussion on a different plateau. And so...
I had to assume that CIA at least had a rep at
Nope.
these? No.
Not at all.
Intelligence agencies outside of the FBI, or no?
Okay, this is what happened. I had to eventually pass a lie detector test. Once I passed a lie detector test, I was told. Up until then, it was like 6 weeks of being in limbo, not knowing what was going to happen. They didn't tell me. There was no promises made. I still... This situation, I remember how these thoughts tortured me. I was like in my backyard and doing some weed whacking, and I said, "What's going to happen? What about the children? What about the wife?" And after I passed the lie detector test, they told me, "Oh, you can stay," and there may be a path to citizenship.
Were there conditions on that? You can stay, but
No, there's
you've got to
no more
report
but.
in every year.
No more but. No, just stay. And then, it took a while to make me, to clean me up, so to speak. I had to, like, stop living based on that birth certificate, but I was allowed to keep the name. But then my driver's license had to be changed, and on and on. So it took a while to...
The humanity.
And it wasn't easy, because I was lucky enough that they found this one man in the FBI who knew how to do it. The first agent that they assigned me to gave me information that when I talked to a lawyer, the lawyer said, "No, I can't do that for you, because you're going to break the law." So it was a unique situation. There was very little experience, so they had to drive me into Canada and bring me back. So there's this document when you enter the United States that was done the foundation to get the driver's license and blah blah blah. And after they told me, it's going to be okay, I met one CIA agent, period, just once. There was no heavy-duty interaction with CIA. I also spent an afternoon with NSA to show them the algorithm that I used for encryption and decryption. And that was it. Later on, I've given some talks at DIA, and also at an event that has now, they're not doing it anymore, but it's Joint Counterintelligence Training for the Armed Forces and Quantico.
Yeah. Do you go to Spookfest?
I don't even know what that is.
You don't know what Spookfest is?
No.
I
have not been invited.
A nonprofit arm of the agency that takes care of the families of the fallen puts on a rock concert.
Oh, wow.
Invite only. It's
see, I didn't get an invitation.
I've gotten an invite multiple times. Dude, I'm a very insular person. Like I'm not an event guy. I usually pass. I like going home with my wife and my dog, which my dog's bit him. We had to go to the hospital over that one. No, I'm just not a big. I'm a relationship guy. I'm just not a big. Song and dance guy.
No, I hear you. I was at DEF CON last year.
Yes.
I hated it. You know why? I can't stand big crowds. I've never been to a football game in the United States because I'm afraid of that crowd, because crowds can take on a personality of their
masses.
own,
Yeah.
and I just like, ugh. I now show behavior with individuals that's behavior of an extreme extrovert. I talk to strangers, I like small gatherings, but big crowds, no. And this event that you're talking about, I probably wouldn't enjoy.
So I like to say that I'm an introverted extrovert.
Yeah, okay.
So I'm an introvert, but there's also this part of what I do, which requires the extrovert to come out, and then it goes right back in. Did anything you provided, had the NSA already had receipt of that information?
They didn't give me feedback. It's probably a confirmation of what they knew. These manual algorithms, fundamentally, I figured this out. Nobody told me this, but with a little scientific training in math, the whole idea is to randomize as much as possible, even though there's always a pattern. That's why the KGB told me, well, this algorithm is only good for 300 uses. Okay, the one-time pad, if used properly, that cannot be broken, not even by a supercomputer. But randomize and make sure that the resulting, it's always digits. There are roughly as many ones in a radiogram or in whatever the encrypted final result is as many ones as there are twos, as threes, fours, and fives. So, and I believe I confirmed that to them. The NSA has some of the smartest people on the planet.
They do. What we call nerds.
Yeah,
but they're cool nerds. They've got more purpose than I served on the battlefield.
I love nerds. I used to be one. It's like when I started the job as a programmer, I would go home and teach myself machine language on the laptop. Not though they didn't have laptop on the personal computer, because I loved it. And then I got into management, and I loved my nerds, because there's one thing about nerds. Very few nerds will lie to you, because they know if they lie to the machine,
they're binary, zeros and ones.
Yes.
And quite frankly, those are the people that change the world. It's not my kind.
Yeah.
I'm a run-of-the-mill soldier that did his part, but that doesn't hurt my ego whatsoever. Jack, I want to take a quick break. We're going to take a restroom break, and then let's get into some contemporary issues.
Sounds good.
You've got a perspective that Americans need to hear, and I remember back to a woman. We were evaluating her technology, which was fabulous within the. I'm trying to think of the word. Basically, facial. It was a facial technology, and she was brilliant. And she was born in the USSR and immigrated into the United States. And basically, she said people don't realize in the United States how lucky they have it.
Oh yeah,
it's lack of. She said, and I swear to God, verbatim, lack of perspective. And there's this entitlement within Americans. And I've said that. I believe that. I think world travel is the highest form of education. When you get to go and see all these different cultures and let's say forms of government, you become appreciative for what you have in the United States. I'm not saying, and I've heard you say this, there is no perfect human, which means there is no perfect government, but we're pretty damn good. I don't want to say we're close. Best country in the world, even if you multiply our problems by 5, but we've got some, it seems like insanity or mental insanity is spreading within the United States in some of these narratives, which I just wildly disagree of. We spoke, and I want to start here. You said when you were being educated as a youth within East Germany, you guys had a map, and it was split into 3 colors, map of the world.
Yep.
There's blue for the democracies, red for communist countries, and purple for third world countries, or was it yellow?
No, it was green.
Green.
So, and when you say democracies, that was the enemy for us, and it was capitalism, right?
Greed,
that was blue. Okay.
Is that greed? When you guys say capitalism,
greed and exploitation of the poor working class. I mean,
the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat.
I was one of the things that was somewhat surprising to me was when I had my first taste of the Western world in Canada. There didn't seem to be, the downtrodden masses. Yeah, there was some homeless here and there, but nowadays there's a whole lot more homelessness than in those days. So that was my first eye-opener, that what we were taught was not accurate, let's put it mildly.
Yes.
Exploitation, and the whole idea that the United States, and we one thing we knew that couldn't be hidden from us, because there were enough families in the East that had relatives in the West, and so they would travel back and forth, and they would get stuff made in West Germany, and it was always better, and it was cheaper, and there was more of it. But we rationalized it, not we. It was given to us that way. It's because the imperialist countries, now we're going into imperialism, which means dominating the world, was robbing the third world countries of their wealth. The bananas were cheap because they just like the United something that stole the bananas from Guatemala, right? And on. It was a rationalization. There's a kernel of truth to that, okay? But the wealth generated within the Western country particularly in the United States, came from the inside, came from the entrepreneurial spirit that was allowed to flourish here, that also, attracted a lot of legal immigrants with great skills to the United States because they knew they could do what they do best and thrive, okay? So none of that was known to me at the time, and I acquired that knowledge by experience very slowly over time.
So we get to, and you were told and shown that slowly the red was expanding as you were growing up.
The green, some of the green turned pink. There was
still third world, but under socialistic or communistic.
And allies, and soon to be part of, the Warsaw Pact or whatever. Yes, and there was a movement in that direction, particularly during the time of the Vietnam War, when Vietnam all of a sudden became communist, the entire country, right?
And from our perspective, in one. I respect JFK. I think he was a phenomenal president. I don't think he was perfect.
No, he wasn't.
No, not.
He slept with a Stasi agent.
He was a handsome dude. He couldn't keep it zipped up. But we feared the domino effect, which I think is fair to say, and that if Vietnam was to fall to communist regime, that it would spread to the rest of East Asia.
And you know what? Based on what I experienced, that this is easy to understand that there was a danger of that happening.
But it proved in the end totally inaccurate. And
it became an obsession.
Yes, which cost 50,000 plus American lives, young lives. It's, funny enough, JFK, and I know you know the history, was not a fan of the CIA. And the fact that they had carte blanche to do what they want. And ultimately, I think we're seeing that he ended up on the target list of the very agency that falls under him as the president of the United States. But with Vietnam, you said something very interesting. You said that was the beginning, I don't want to say the end, the beginning of the end. But it was the beginning of what we're seeing in America here, especially with the protests and that those... I'll call them dissidents, then became the professors and teachers in grammar schools.
Well, think about it. Let's say I'm a 20-year-old student. I'm getting ready for having a good job and making a good life, and then I have to go to Vietnam and risk my life for something I don't quite understand
or believe in.
So it became very personal. And for a whole crowd of people. I once met in Bulgaria a student, a female, who was a student at Columbia when there was this uprising at Columbia University. And there were a number of those incidents that radicalized a certain section of the population, a young section that eventually became leaders in society, and a lot of them joined government and or became teachers at university. And what they had inside was sort of partially externally induced, but also internally produced a brainwashing that gave them provided them with a fundamentally anti-American psychology.
The one thing, and this is off topic, this is a personal point that drives me nuts, is the lack of reception for the soldiers that came home from Vietnam and you're tracking. They were spit on, called baby killers. We were welcomed with open arms in the global war on terror. We were, because of 9/11, because it impacted the U.S. and 3,000 American lives were similar to Pearl Harbor with World War II. It had mass support to go against the Axis powers. But soldiers don't determine foreign policy and where and when we go to war. We're just tasked with fighting the fight. And to the Vietnam generation, that's why I went into the military, because I grew up on Vietnam movies and reading Vietnam books of just selfless valor, and that is still the greatest generation to me. They just fought an unpopular war, and unfortunately we lost, but it wasn't their fault. They won almost every battle they were tasked with. It was failed policy. We saw something very similar with the global war on terror. I think we talked about this on the phone. Afghanistan, in the end, proved, true to its name, the graveyard of empires.
Yeah, Afghanistan had a lot to do with the fall of the Soviet Union. Afghanistan and Star Wars.
Or so believed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for the USSR, with Afghanistan, it just deployed depleted resources.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then morale,
yes, nationally
must have been low after the pullout.
Yes, absolutely. And, I think I was still in East Germany, and we were so excited when in Afghanistan a left government came to power, and it all fell apart. Surprise, surprise. Now, this is, I'm just going to add a thought here. The flaw that I see in a lot of American foreign policy is a messianic attitude towards the world. We just need to liberate everybody, and so they can live the good life the way we do, without an understanding, without empathy, how other people live, and under what ideology they have grown up, the individuals, and so on and so forth. We don't. This is like when you want to counsel an individual and you go from the inside out. That never works. You must just be like I am. No, you can't. You need to understand that person, and maybe you can have an influence. But people, as well as nations, need to own their own destiny, their own future, and make their own decisions. And American foreign policy has failed miserably in that. I'm not saying in every respect, but
in a lot of respects. I'm going to agree with you here. Again, there are sometimes very smart people that make very bad decisions.
Yeah.
How many times does the United States need to realize that? And let me say this: war is fucking stupid, but war is necessary as long as humans walk the earth. That is just human nature, because somebody is trying to take advantage of someone else or enacting terror on the innocent.
Yeah, can I interrupt you
Yeah.
and add a thought? Another fatal flaw in thinking of a certain sector of American decision makers is the belief that people are fundamentally good. There's no evil in people. Any evil that
fatal flaw.
Yes, any evil that expresses itself has to do with circumstances that the people are in, and if we just liberate them, it's sort of like communist thinking. Take those.
Well, it's not communist. It's not democratic. It's power. Power.
But there's also a naive thinking that there's people who really want to believe in that, honestly believe in that. No, people can't be evil. We're not born. Like Christianity says, we are born sinners. No. Well, a lot of us have managed to control the urges, and they may not be as strong, but there's always born evil out there, and that's when when that evil steps into action, it has to be fought,
eradicated.
Yeah. Exactly.
It has to, and if you're not prepared to eradicate it, which means collateral damage and just a lot of civilian deaths.
And now we're going right into Hamas and the situation in
Moscow,
in the Middle East.
Well, we just Moscow. And here's, and I want to circle around here. Do I view the current situation with Ukraine as if the United States is at war with Russia? I'm going to go on the record and I'm going to say I don't. I think the damaged Russian-U.S. relations in large part is due to a diplomatic botch by our side. When and I think a lot of this came out, whether you liked the Putin, and I'm sorry, the famous commentator Tucker Carlson interview, which was Putin's platform to do, and he went on a tirade. I think this Ukraine fight has to come to an end, but there has to be a reset with Russia, and I do think that is possible. It's just there's got to be proper negotiations. There's got to be a win for both sides, and I'm not talking about the Donbass region. That's still very complicated for people to figure out. But Russia's incursion, you said it earlier, is Putin thrives off of the fear that people are going to invade Russia. NATO slowly encroached east based off previous agreements.
And there's a senator, I forgot his name, who on TV said that Ukraine should be made a member of NATO. I said, "Are you nuts? Why was NATO founded? It was founded to defend Western values. There are no Western values in Ukraine. There have not been. It used to be known as the most corrupt country on the planet, and I don't know if they moved away from that. Maybe they relinquished that title. I don't believe so. Ukraine does not belong into NATO. So and even just like having these alliances and moving closer to Russia, that just increased the pre-existing paranoia that Russians have, and that is why Vladimir Putin still has the support of the majority of Russians. And I know this. I met a person who went from the U.S. as a missionary to the Soviet Union when Gorbachev actually invited some missionaries to build up morale. Anyway, he stayed, and he now lives in the Ukraine, and he has friends in both countries. And he confirmed. He says he's talking with really smart people in Russia, and they all support Putin, even though he looks to us in some respects rather ridiculous.
Yeah.
But so and I don't understand. And I think one of the reasons that we are so supportive of Ukraine and we moved that way, Russia has become the most favorite political football. It started, with Russian interference, and then the Democrats and the Republicans are trying to outdo each other. Who is more hostile towards Russia? That's bad, because that is when politics dominate foreign policy, and that will never work well.
I'll say, respect the Ukrainian people and the way they're fighting.
Yeah,
I think we've also seen. When I came into the military, we were studying weapon ID and armor identification on Russian-type weapons in armored vehicles, aircraft, everything. We were preparing for the next World War III with Russia. That's in '98. That's what we were focused on, or North Korea. We fail to recognize histories. And again, it depends who the White House is pulling in terms of subject matter experts to advise them on Afghanistan. Again, to your point, this is my perspective. Afghanistan, and I think we're fooled. People get fooled into believing that because they do something successful one time, they've got to figure it out. Look at our ability to rebuild Germany, which was already a Christian industrialized nation, as well as Japan, not predominantly Christian, but Japan was industrialized. It was easy to rebuild those nations, especially in the conduct of which the war was ended. But Afghanistan, to impose a nationalistic democratic government on Afghanistan where people have no nationalism, they don't care what happens to the tribes in the valley next to them. They've never even seen them. They don't care. That was foolhardy. You go to Iraq, which, let's be honest with Iraq, I think, And I love George Bush, and I'll give you the reason why. Met him once in the Oval Office with one of the mothers of of my guys that was killed, and I've never seen a man treat that woman like she was the only woman on earth. Just personable. But everyone I talked to, they're like, that is just George Bush. He was great with people. You got Dick Cheney, who I think is one step away from the devil, and they used the nationalism post 9/11 based off bad intelligence to justify the invasion into Iraq, only to realize that, again, to your point, cultures are just different. It's not for us to go in and impose different cultures. And the same thing with Saddam Hussein is in Libya. Gaddafi. Yeah. How many times are we going to learn that sometimes the devil you know is better than the devil you don't?
Well, in both cases, the situation destabilized, and to a point where, you know, there doesn't seem to be a way out. And you're absolutely right. I think the war to get Iraq out of Kuwait was justified.
Yes.
Stop right there. Isolate the guy.
Sanctions.
Yeah.
Embargoes. But I think we came to realize, because Iran was a problem. Iran's been a problem for a long time, since the Islamic uprisings and the Iranian hostage situation of, what was that, 1979 or 1980? I'm blanking on my history, but Saddam was the wall that kept Iran at bay from the West. And now that we created that vacuum, and we felt purpose in our fight. You know, and I wasn't there on the ground for the initial Iraq invasion. That's just timing. I can't choose. When Al-Qaeda started to pour into Iraq, there was purpose, because we also knew that was the organization that was behind 9/11. So there was purpose that we're eradicating Al-Qaeda again. But the Middle East is, I mean, I hate to brush in broad strokes, but if there's one region that can't come to the negotiation table, and I'm not talking about the crown princes of UAE or the Gulf Cooperation Council, it's Islamic extremism, which just hit Moscow.
Right.
And to think that the war on terrorism stopped when we pulled out from Afghanistan was foolhardy.
No, and I told you about this book that was written by an ex Islamist who became a Christian, and he cites passages from the Quran which says quite clearly that their God tells them to go fight the infidels, kill them, in those words.
What are your thoughts on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict right now?
Israel has to defeat evil, and they are in a very, very difficult situation in that U.S. media, more and more I hear interviews with the people that are suffering, the civilians in the Gaza territory, and it's very touching, and you want to cry, and you think about children dying, and now more and more Israel is getting blamed for that, and we forget what happened, what triggered all of this. If they don't defeat evil, it's like making peace with Hitler. It didn't work. Okay, it encouraged him, and that evil has to be eradicated. As much as like it hurts me think about, there is collateral damage. However, and here I want to, and then it just occurred to me driving in here. By that logic, the United States and Great Britain shouldn't have bombed German cities in World War II. We shouldn't have exploded the nuclear weapon over Japan, because we knew, and when you bombed the cities, that those were not even military targets. Okay, that's So that's okay. We don't even make that comparison now, and the anti-Semitism that is rearing up its ugly head is astounding, and I have great admiration for the Jewish people throughout history because they always fought their way back, and they've always been attacked and discriminated against simply because they're so capable and so successful.
There is no way to get around this one other than to say, hey, my heart bleeds for the innocent Palestinians.
Yeah.
But you've got a long memory. Do you remember which people were on TV celebrating in the streets hours after 9/11? The Palestinians. There were other regions of the Muslim
Muslim
world. We don't hit the streets cheering that Palestinians are being killed.
Of course not.
We don't. And therein lies the problem in the two-state solution, in my very uneducated opinion, just doesn't work. And the Palestinians are a sect of people that the Jordanians, the Egyptians, nobody wants to be involved with, other than these time of needs when you've got children and women involved with hunger and just poor living conditions, which is an understatement.
Well, again, and the foundation is religious fanaticism.
Mm.
If you know that you serve a God by killing children and women, you rationalize this away.
Killing women and children from their perspective sounds actually sympathetic. I mean, dismemberment.
If they do it
rape,
in service, yes.
I mean, the things they did on October 7th were atrocious, barbaric.
And to now equate that behavior with the collateral damage that's being caused by Israel trying to exterminate that evil, that is at best naive and stupid, but at worst highly condemnable.
Yes.
And we have too much of this in the United States. And I was on Zoom with a friend of mine in Germany. It's all over Europe the same way, the same thinking.
Yes.
Unfortunately. And so if we continue on this path that we're on now, that eventually we will have shoveled our own grave. Obviously, you know that I'm an optimist. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done all the stupid things that I did. So I was always sort of in the knowledge that it'll be okay. But this one, I'm worried about. I'm really worried about, and particularly because I have this 13-year-old daughter, and I would like for her to experience the United States as it was when I came here.
This one is what's troubling me internally, because, Jack, I'm the same way. My reply has always been, in dire times, we Americans will always find a way. But I'm starting to wonder, outside of open conflict within the United States, if that's even possible. And I'm not advocating for open conflict. I think the two sides are polarizing so poorly that, and you know this, that when two sides can no longer have civil dialogue or rhetoric, then what comes after that?
Yeah.
Violence.
Fisticuffs. And when emotions triumph over reasonable thinking, and we become a very emotional society. There's one thought that has been thrown around, and I'm not advocating it, but and this is probably not feasible, but Texas, Arizona, performing in another country, Arizona, maybe a couple of other states.
Texans joke about that all the time, and then redraw on the map for California. It's like New Yorkism, and then Florida and Texas.
Yeah, we are, I think, the sixth biggest economy on the planet.
Yeah, and everyone's moved here. Yourself from the East Coast, and I have no question why you escaped. Though I do love going to Manhattan for one day. I'll go to Manhattan for one day. And
I
I'd love
hear
to
you.
get out.
I've been there. Yeah.
I want to hit something, and then ultimately I want to end on the differences between your upbringing and in America and what you found to be the differences. But before we do, I've been on a few news shows where they bring me on as commentators regarding Prigozhin, who was the head of Wagner Group, or Alexei Navalny. And the commentators are, this is outrageous. I'm like, this is just the Russian way.
Yeah, and both of these individuals were asking for it. I'm sorry, that doesn't excuse these,
because the system's known.
Yes,
they know the system.
These types of comments do not imply that I agree with the murderer's actions, but Navalny could have stayed in Germany. He went right back to Russia. I think he had this martyr complex. He wanted to die for the cause. I mean, that was just plain stupid, right? I'm sorry, and I feel for his family. And Prigozhin, he went in. He was in over his head. That was his ego. He deserved the fate. Multiple times over.
In retrospect, I wonder if he's dead now. But if he wishes he had just continued, I mean, he would have lost. If he made it to Moscow, his force would have been crushed. But why he wouldn't remain in place? Let's see. He went to Turkey, correct? Or no, it wasn't Turkey. I'm forgetting what country he basically had approval to go to.
Don't remember. No, wait a minute.
Bulgaria?
He was shot down.
Over Russia?
Yeah.
Yes. But to try to take down Putin, get exiled, and then to come back, it's like you had to have known something was going to happen.
Yeah, I don't know what country he wound up in initially.
It'll come to me. I think it was Bulgaria, but as per their
it was a case of ego. I believe he really didn't want to topple Putin, but he was very unhappy with Putin's military leadership, and they were inept, and he was right, and he was probably frustrated. He couldn't convince Vladimir to change him, and his ego took over. He's the kind of guy who wasn't used to failure.
Yes. Which is, also the same reasons he rose to power. It just was his downfall.
No.
But, you say inept. The Russian military has shown an ineptness that we couldn't even imagine. Logistically, tactically, especially technologically. But as poor as the Russian military has been, they win this Ukrainian fight hands down. By mere masses.
Numbers, yeah.
And that's what people fail to realize. I want to close with this. For your typical American, what were the differences between what you grew up to know and what you experienced in Eastern Bloc countries, and why you love America so much? What are the differences? And I think you've established people are great on both sides. It's just, free enterprise versus a communistic economy.
Yeah, that's a rather open-ended question. First of all, this is another genetics-based behavior. I've always been anti-authoritarian. I always loved to make my own decisions, and I know that's in the genes. So I'll share with you something that happened when my daughter was 5 years old. We took her to a gym. It wasn't school. It was just like, we pay a few dollars and they can run around and have fun. So the coach lined the kids up. There was about a dozen kids. Line up, and then she said, "Follow me." 11 children followed her, and mine went the other way and wandered around in the gym. Her mother was just so embarrassed, and I said to her, "That's a good sign. You're going to be a leader." And she did it over and over and over again. We took her to a dance class. She didn't like dancing. She sat on the floor. Okay, so So I had to learn to manage the anti-authoritarianism in me because I was smart enough that if I fought the system would prevail. So I got very close being kicked out of high school because I challenged the teachers. So so the freedom to fail that we had and still have to some degree in the United States is very, very important for growth. Just and as you know, risk taking is part of my nature. And if you don't take risk, and I want to talk to everybody who's listening. If you don't take risk, your life's going to be boring, and one day you're going to be close to the end and have to
Correct.
say the one thing I will not have to say is I could have been a contender. I tried a lot. I failed, but it was always interesting. So that is what really is the most attractive thing with regard to the United States. And the other thing is the most brilliant document ever written in history after the Bible. But we're talking about governing people, and that's the American Constitution. How to avoid concentration of power in a small sector of government. And when you look at the history of mankind, you look at, for instance, revolutions. Let's just talk about communist revolution, where everybody was supposed to be equal, and everything. The oppressed would rise up, and we were told that we were a state of peasants and workers. Well, that state of peasants and workers became a hierarchy, at the top of which was the Politburo, which was a dictatorship. And even if it started honestly and well-meaning, every sort of communist revolution wound up as a dictatorship. So the Constitution, the way it is constructed, avoids too much concentration in too few people. And unfortunately, now we have a situation where I believe there's too much concentration in private industry.
Mm.
We got the oligarchs being in. We have oligarchs. Let's face it. It's not as wicked as it's in Russia. People still don't fall out of windows and stuff like that. But it's an unholy alliance. It's an elite. It's a thinking that we are better than everybody else, and just like this one book that always comes to mind, written by my favorite politician, Hillary Clinton, it takes a village. That's the start of collectivism, and collectivism is what I can't stand. And it doesn't matter whether you call it communism, socialism, or an oligarchy. It's the collective. As an individualist, as an anti-authoritarian, I want to know who I am. And I tell people that don't define yourself based on your membership in a group, in an organization, because you lose self, and at one point you might be moved in a direction that when you first joined is not the same, and you become internally corrupted, not corrupt in the sense of taking money. This is all what I so like about the United States, and we still have enough of it, but it's under siege. Now, what I don't like, and I told you this before we started the interview, is our educational system from kindergarten to your senior year in high school. In East Germany, I never once took a multiple choice test or a true and false test. When I came here, I said, what is this? It's because the focus is on facts in the United States. Historically has been, we're not teaching kids to think anymore and come up with their own conclusions, particularly in this day and age where we are bombarded with so much information and misinformation, and need to figure out, what has a semblance of truth. It's tough for you and me. And if you don't learn how to think and you feel your way around life, and you remember maybe some facts, and that's becoming a problem, I'm worried about this generation taking over, because already our government, and it's not just our government, I just talked with a friend of mine in Germany. There is a lack of just raw competence, never mind ideology. It's just like getting things done and doing things right and
working hard.
Yeah, instead of like yapping and making like really badass decisions. I'm sorry for that word.
It's okay. I've done much worse.
But see, that's the one thing. And when the wall came down and the Germans got together, West German educators agreed that the East German and the Russian system was a superior system in terms of teaching kids stuff other than communist ideology. You take that out of the way, it was hardcore. It was many hours, lots of work, no mercy, and no electives, not a one. Everybody took the same stuff. And man, your chemistry, your physics, your math. I had, when I started college in the United States, I took a course in calculus that was below the level that what I had in high school, and that we all had in high school in East Germany.
And that, sir, raises resilient kids.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer to that. I've got some inclinations, but it's they say don't ever go against the teacher union. One of the most powerful unions.
You read my mind.
Yeah,
you read my mind. There's a lot of lazy teachers.
There's a lot of unqualified teachers.
Yeah, and teachers are afraid to make decisions because they could be challenged by parents. And if you do multiple choice and true and false, the computer just gives you the grade, right? It's easy. The union leadership has an agenda, and I'm, if you took a secret vote, I'm thinking there would be a high percentage of really well-meaning teachers who disagree with the politicization of our educational system.
You know what I loved about first off, whenever a teacher, you knew they were that teacher that didn't give you multiple choice or true and false. Mm-hmm. It was all fill in, basically display your logic, state facts, come up with your hypothesis, prove it. The first response was, screw this guy or this woman, because her tests are hard. They're not easy to pass.
Oh, yeah.
But it also gives you the opportunity to BS in a very logical way, even if you lack knowledge about that specific question, to basically display what logic you have to lay out an argument. And good teachers would ultimately say, hey, you get the answer wrong, but appreciated your train of thought.
Yeah, and unfortunately, if you give people a chance to get away with minimum effort, a lot of people take that. So I remember I started college in the U.S., and I had friends who had taken certain courses already, and they advised me not to take this guy. He's too tough, and I always picked the tough teacher because I wanted to learn something.
And you aced it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Diamonds are forged under pressure.
Yeah, exactly right.
Not at rest.
And this withdrawal into social media. My God, when I go to the gym, there's kids. I call them kids, but they're young men and women. They between sets, they spend 10 minutes scrolling on their phone instead of talking to each other.
That is why I built a pretty damn good gym, and Will comes in. It's got everything you need, because I got tired of staring at somebody sitting on a piece of equipment on their phone. And I'm like, exactly. I would just stare just to get their attention.
Yes,
I don't want to be overly rude. But Jack, what do you got going on? I know you speak to a lot of companies. Where can people find you? What initiatives do you have
Well,
going on?
I have a website which will be redone. It was built when I sold my book. That book is still out for. It's done pretty well. It made the bestseller list initially when it came out. It's
Yes.
called Deep Undercover. I also have a very, very well made documentary, but it's audio. It's not a podcast. It's interviews, and it has 13 episodes. It's called The Agent. It can be accessed for free on every major streaming platform. But there's a bunch of things that I'm working on. One of them, there is a good chance that there will be a film based on my life coming out. It could be a documentary. It could be a
Hollywood.
Hollywood based, and it could be both, one after the other. I'm talking with 4 interested parties,
Good for you.
which is brand new. I think more people who have a say or who want to do something with high quality, mature content in this industry have gotten notice of me. Had something to do with some interviews, and so that's all good. And I'm a pretty good writer. I didn't realize it until I started writing. I'm co-writing a script for TV with a retired MI6 guy. That's going to be espionage. It's going to be fiction, but there will be nothing in that fiction that couldn't have happened, hasn't already happened, and could happen in this. And so we want to keep it real. Okay, that's all. That's interesting. And we got the story already laid out. It's really good. If I like something that I write, it's pretty good. And for short term, income, I'm still engaged in public appearances. There's a number of presentations I can give. My favorite is called Applied Psychology, which is...
I love that. I love that. The next time you give that, you're going to have to invite me. I got to hear this.
And it's about, taking episodes of my life as a spy and telling the audience how I overcame difficult situations, how I handled the challenges of being a lone wolf agent and so forth, and then relating that to I had a very successful career in corporate America. How I used some of those skills and talents to build a successful career in corporate, and also teaching people that there's things you can learn too that will help you. For instance, my ability to read people. That is not a talent. That's a skill that I acquired over time by observing and watching. I can read people within a minute of talking practically about anything. It is what it is. I have a database of characters in here, and my subconscious pretty much compares while I'm talking to the individual and comes up with a basic understanding, intelligent, honest, stuff like that, very basics. And I have proven to myself that this works really well. I call it subconscious pattern recognition. So there's other stuff in that presentation, but I also have a presentation that if so desired, I can talk about my life, which, if you haven't read the book, it's an interesting presentation. By the way, my presentations are all pictures only. There's no bullet lists, except for one, when it comes to what the KGB was looking for in candidates to recruit. And there's another one. It's called An Undercover Love Story. It's about the role of love in my life, and it's not just it starts from not being loved as a child, like not experienced the emotional love, then messing up my first love, which was a disaster. It ended because I was dumped unceremoniously, and I went numb for about 3 years, but I threw myself into the study of chemistry, and that helped a lot. And then the love of for my 18-month-old daughter that completely changed my life. in between there was the love for communism. I was in love with the communist ideology, and I can end it now that I have another child, a late one, and the marriage to her mother ended about 18 months ago. We still love each other, and we have the best relationship. And we can co-write a book, how to mess up a marriage and wildly succeed in divorce. So there's
that one would be the ultimate New York Times bestseller.
There is never a happy ending. And there won't be, and I'm not looking forward to a happy ending in my life. So, and obviously I also, and that I became a Christian, and I love, at minimum I can share this freely, I love Christian morale. This is what made me fall in love with Christian ideology. But it's another block. But anyway, you know what I'm talking about. So I'm traveling. I'm widely available, and if people want to reach out to me, it can be done through my website.
JackBarsky.com.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, Jack, I can't thank you enough for coming on. I can't thank you enough for the time you've given. This has been one hell of a story, man. And you always say, I can't wait to watch what you do next.
Yeah, me too. And the story is still writing itself. And I tell you, and I'm not making it up. I'm not the author of the story. There are so many instances where others made decisions that impacted me. I didn't even know it, like the Mitrokin guy, like the mother of my first daughter who decided to get pregnant. If she don't get pregnant, I'm not talking to you today.
Yes.
And there's a series of decisions that had to be made for 60 Minutes to get wind of me and invite me for an interview. I had nothing to do with that. All of a sudden, I get a phone call say, I'm a Dragan Mihailovich. I'm the producer for 60 Minutes. We want to talk with you about something that we would like to do. I said, what? So there's a lot of people who, I never did that, who plan their life.
Yes.
And sometimes these plans do pretty well. I made short-term plans, but long-term plans, I just played along and see what happens next. And I listened to people making suggestions, and then there were these decisions in the background. So if anybody thinks I'm bragging about my life, I would be really stupid to do so. And one thing, I'm not stupid.
No, you're not. Jack, again, thanks for coming into the audience. Appreciate you guys listening. Again, reminder, go to Apple Podcasts. I was going to say Chrome. We no longer have that. Spotify. Leave a review. We actually read them. They help us out. We appreciate it, guys. We will see you next time out here.